here now, so I'm really happy. Let me welcome to the show. Math is what it's all about. He's running for president of these United States. He's from New York, the one and only Andrew Yang.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry it's taken me so long, but you knew I was going to be here. There was never any doubt.
Okay. I appreciate that. Before we get started with political questions, where'd you learn how to wobble? Just going to start out. Just look.
You mean where was I born and toddling around?
No, where'd you learn how to do that dance?
Oh, I got it. When I did the Cupid Shuffle and I had a little bit of head shake.
Yeah.
You got to be born with that kind of rhythm, Karen.
I see you. I see you. All right. Why do you want to be president? I know you've been asked that question many times before. There are like 11 people in this race. We were just talking before you got here about why people are in and why they shouldn't be in and who's hot and who's not. Why you?
I'm not a career politician. I'm running for president because I see the future we're leaving to our kids. I've got 2 young kids who are 4 and 7, one of whom has special needs, and we're leaving them an awful mess. And I do not think that our current politicians are up to the challenge of cleaning up this mess, in large part because it's happened underneath their watch. And they don't seem to understand the fact that we're in the midst of the greatest economic transformation in the history of the country, what experts are calling the 4th industrial revolution. AI is about to leave the labs and start ripping apart our businesses in earnest. And we are decades behind on technology in D.C. because it does not matter to their business, their livelihoods, but it matters to us.
Let's talk about that. It's Tech Tuesday here on the Karen Hunter Show. And so that's glad that you're here today. We've talked about AI, the next trillionaire, the first trillionaire in business is going to come out of that. What does that look like? When you say AI is going to rip up our current landscape in business, what does that look like?
I spoke to 70 CEOs here in New York City a while back, and I asked how many are looking at replacing back office clerical workers and call center workers with AI and software. And out of 70 CEOs in attendance, all 70 hands went up. That's what I mean by ripping apart businesses, where if you have 2.5 million Americans who work in call centers right now making $14 an hour, AI can do that job in 3 or 4 years, and you don't need artificial general intelligence. You just need a really good decision tree and a couple thousand voice prompts and software that can detect changes in our tones of voice. And then you can do a number not on 10 or 20 call center workers, but on 1 to 2 million. And that's a very obvious application. There are other inobvious ones that are right down the pike. And so the people who know the most about technology are the most concerned. And that is not people in Washington, D.C.
So one could argue we just had a non-politician who's running this country into the ground right now. Somebody that argued that, I'm coming in with business experience and I'm going to, run this like a CEO. And we just played a clip where you kind of debunked that.
I'm not that kind of guy. No, I am that kind of guy in the sense that I'm obviously not a career politician. But the fact is the American people have been searching for some kind of change for years now. And it's not just the fact that Donald Trump won. It was also Bernie Sanders' outsized success in the last cycle, and even Barack Obama winning in 2008, where we've had this instinct that our government is decades behind the curve in terms of the real challenges of this time, and we've been casting about for some kind of actor to do something about it because we sense that the machinery in D.C. is not going to do anything about it, and they categorically will not. So to me, it's not that you need the most experienced politician you can find, because frankly, if you had the most experienced politician and put him or her in the White House, you wouldn't expect dramatic changes. But right now, unfortunately, we're at a point where the debt has been building up for decades, and now it's overdue. And the question is, how are we going to pay it?
Why not make that push from outside, from without? So the greatest change in our economy has happened from people like Jeff Bezos, from Mark Zuckerberg, from the folk at Google. The greatest changes in technology in our country didn't happen in Washington, probably could never happen in Washington, because the role of the president is not as broad as people. It's not king. He's not a king, or she's not a queen maker. These are people that have a very specific executive branch job to do.
For sure. We're in the midst of the greatest winner-take-all economy in the history of the world. And you talk about the first trillionaire. Amazon's a $1 trillion tech company right now. Jeff Bezos is worth $120 billion post-divorce. Yeah, and his company, Amazon,
I saw that.
his company paid zero in taxes last year. You got to look around and say, how the heck is a $1 trillion tech company paying zero in taxes, less than everyone listening to this right now. So when you ask me, like, hey, how are you going to make these big changes? We have to rewrite the rules of the economy so that they work for the normal American, the average person is struggling to pay their bills, which is most of us at this point. 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And the only way to do that is to get control of the government and rewrite the rules from the top down.
Okay.
If you were to be on the outside, let's say I start a tech company, and I've been an entrepreneur in the private sector for years, frankly, my incentives are going to be to get rid of workers, not try and do something positive for the people that are getting pushed aside.
So basic income, that'll be one of your first things that you...
The
so
freedom dividend, that's right.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Freedom
Basic,
dividend.
you can call it basic
Okay.
income. You can, that's the term
All
for
right,
it.
day one, you swear in, January, it's cold, you have millions of people, you're going to have the pictures to show it. How do you get this implemented?
Well, first, I want to give a little bit of background on universal basic income, the freedom dividend. Certainly not my idea, not a new idea. Thomas Paine was for it. Martin Luther King championed it in the 60s. Said straight out, the best solution for poverty is to abolish it directly through a guaranteed minimum income. It is what he was fighting for when he was assassinated in 68. 1,000 economists endorsed it, and one state actually passed a dividend almost 40 years ago, where now everyone in that state, Alaska, gets between $1,000 and $2,000 of oil money every single year. And what I'm saying to the American people is that technology is the oil of the 21st century. Our data is now worth more than oil, and yet we're not seeing a dime. Like, where's all the data money going? It's going to Facebook, Amazon, Google, and the rest of it. So to your question, how do we pass it? I'm inaugurated in January 2021, and the Democrats are so pumped. They're like, yeah, we beat Trump. We took a bet on the Asian guy, and it worked, and here we are. And we all know that I will have won on the freedom dividend. Like, let's get some cash into people's hands. And the Democrats will be pumped because it's going to make children and families stronger. We can make our people healthier and mentally healthier. But here's the kicker. Republicans don't hate the dividend. Alaska, the state that's had it, Republican governor, deep red state. What they hate is a bureaucracy making everyone's decisions. They do not hate money in people's hands so that we can make our own choices. And you do not need 80% of Congress to pass the dividend. You just need 51%. So I can get this done. And then after we get it done, then the American people will be like, wow, this is the best thing the government's done in like my memory. And then hopefully we can get some more things done too.
What are some more things? Let's go to education, because I think we are in a place right now where we might need to completely blow up our education system because it's not serving our children or the future of this country. What would you do there?
Oh, there's so much work to be done in our schools. And I've got 2 young kids again, so I understand it.
You have them in private school?
The autistic older son is in a special needs school, and then the younger is in a public school.
In New York?
In New York City, yeah.
Okay.
So there's so many things we need to do in education. Number one, we have to pay teachers more. And the data clearly shows good teacher worth his or her weight in gold and better educational outcomes. Number two, you need more teachers, because data also shows having 30, 40 kids per teacher is not great. Number three, we need to lighten up on standardized tests and let teachers actually teach the kids the way that the kids learning. You know, we invented the SAT during World War II to figure out which kids not to send to the front lines. That's really dark. And now we're treating every year like wartime and bludgeoning our kids with these tests. And it's perverting and distorting our teachers' incentives and behaviors. Number four, we need to invest in vocational apprenticeship and technical education, because right now we're overemphasizing college, and college is not the right fit for a lot of kids. And a lot of kids are starting college, not finishing. College is 2.5 times more expensive than when I was there, and so you'd end up with this massive debt load, sometimes without a degree. Number five, we should be emphasizing things that actually make your life better and don't pretend you're all on an assembly line to college. So that's social and emotional learning, financial literacy, the arts, managing technology, which is like an increasing part of life today, and things that the kids would actually get excited about that they can't just look up on their smartphone. And the last thing, I know this is long-winded, is that 2/3 of our kids' outcomes are determined outside of school. That's stress levels in the house, parental time, words read to the child, type of neighborhood. So we're getting increasingly frustrated with our schools because we're like, hey, what's wrong? Can't you teach our kids? And then the teachers all know it's like, I can control about 35% of your kids' outcome, and then 65% happens way before I even get there. And so if we want to actually give our kids a chance to learn, you would put money into the homes and in the hands of families and parents, and then create an environment at home where the kid actually has a fighting chance to learn. and then when they show up to school, they have a real chance to teach them.
We're talking with Andrew Yang, presidential candidate Andrew Yang. You have a law degree, an economics degree, a political science degree. You say you're not a career politician, but you understand Constitution, you understand how this government works, you understand some things. So you're not just coming in as a novice who has no understandings of the workings of this government and how it should work and function better.
No, thank you for noticing. I mean, it is true. I got a law degree. I spent 5 unhappy months as a lawyer, but I did pass the bar. I did take constitutional law. So I've written grant proposals. Like I've worked with governments. I was an appointee in the Obama administration as an ambassador of entrepreneurship. So I've been around the block. I'm not some jerk business person who's like, where. Like I understand the limitations of government, but I think I have a sense of how it functions.
Are you still a billionaire?
I was never a billionaire. What a funny question.
Yes.
Geez, my wife would be very pleased to hear that I was once a billionaire.
But you're very, 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 very wealthy.
I have more than the average American, and you kind of need to have more than the average American to run for president. But I'm definitely no billionaire, that's for sure.
So I love what you're saying about education, and one of the things I volunteer in public school system here in New York a good bit, and one of the things that I see is the lack of cultural competency in the public school system, and I feel like you can't talk about education without infusing that cultural competency in there. And so when you talk about education, I'm curious, as someone who's running education business, even though it was about secondary education.
Yeah.
What's your perspective on that? Because I look at the disparity between how black and brown kids are policed in schools, how they're literally policed and punished in schools, as well as just how they're spoken to from time to time. And for me, I care deeply about those kids. And so I'm curious as to what you think government can do in relation to that at the ground level.
It's such an important observation and question. And as a parent, too, you see it, with your kids. And there are some things the government can do. Like the biggest thing is that we have to stop treating our schools like assembly lines, one size fits all. And essentially right now they're as much behavior modification as they are education, you know what I mean? And part of that is that you have student-to-teacher ratios of 30-1. And so if you're a teacher in front of a bunch of kids, you don't have time or energy or bandwidth to...
My mom grew up in the segregated South where there may have been as many as 40 kids in a class. And the difference was that the teacher lived in the neighborhood, went to the church, was accountable to the community, cared about each and every child. I don't know, there's a lot of data around that. I covered education for 4 years at the New York Daily News, and there's a lot of data around smaller class sizes, but that's not the main factor. I think what Drew is talking about in terms of a cultural awareness and understanding what that kid is going through and having enough concern about their future, their life, but can see a future. I don't know how we legislate that. I don't know how you as president can make that an edict as part of your education system, but it has to happen.
Yeah, I agree. It's not just a numbers thing. It's a based in community thing. It's an empathy thing. It's a humanity thing. And even when you drop your kid off in school, you can actually immediately pick up on whether it's a kind of teacher that's putting heart and soul into each and every kid. And then you feel super grateful. You feel like you're completely fine leaving your kid there. Or sometimes you drop your kid off and you feel like the teacher's priority is just to keep the kids breathing and that's about it. And like whether or not they actually get that sort of nurturing. So the question is, how do you legislate that kind of atmosphere in the classroom? I think a lot of it is easing up on the testing and the assembly line nature of our schools, because right now there's this top-down orientation. And if you're a teacher, you feel like, well, how am I going to get evaluated? How do kids test at like a certain point in the year? And then anything that gets between you and your kids having a certain level of test result, then you see as like a barrier to your doing your job. Whereas a lot of times doing your job might be just sitting down individually with a kid and trying to meet them where they are or teach them in a way that's actually impactful for them, which might not be like a top-down approach.
But let's get back to culture for a second, because there are a lot of people who feel that this election will be won for the Democrats on the backs of black people, as always. So there has to be an agenda for black people. And we had a conversation off mic or on mic about the ignoring of black men in particular. Everyone's black women. I'm a black woman. We show up, we show out. We're going to, support in ways that catapult people into White Houses, state houses, etc. What's your strategy to not talk to, because we don't need to be pandered to? What agenda items will you have in your administration that will service the community?
Well, we have a black agenda, from strengthening HBCUs to getting rid of private prisons to getting rid of this punitive cash bail system that's essentially criminalizing poverty. But the most fundamental ways we can help the black community is by putting buying power, putting cash money into black consumers' hands, which will then spur black business owners and black entrepreneurs in your communities. And right now, I'm driven by this in part because the trends, unfortunately, are really disastrous for black people and people of color, where there's this natural thought that, things are going to get better, things are going to get better. A study came out a number of months ago that said the median African-American household net worth will be 0 by 2053. And the reason for that is that we're in the midst of this economic transformation that's going to gut many of the most common jobs in our economy.
Andrew, it's terrific to get to meet you. So your book is called The War on Normal People. And as I said, I've been in politics a long, long time. Most candidates are not normal people, right? There's a chip that people have, especially to run for president. And
got to be pretty weird, I agree.
There's no doubt. The question I have is, the things you've been talking about here seem, even for somebody who's a former Republican now, seem eminently reasonable in many ways. How, first of all, I think that comes through on the stage when you're with your opponents, but how's that been, how have folks you've talked to on the road felt in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, wherever? I assume you've been in nearly every state at this point.
Yeah, people recognize the truth when they hear it, Reed. When I say, look, have you noticed stores closing around where you work and live? They say yes. And I say, why are those stores closing? And then they think about it for a second and they say Amazon. I'm like, yeah, that's right. Amazon soaking up $20 billion in business, paying 0 in taxes, closing 30% of your stores and malls. And being a retail clerk's the most common job in your community. Average retail clerk's a 39-year-old woman making between $9 and $10 an hour. And they're like, oh my gosh, you're right. That is messed up that they're paying 0 in taxes while they're doing that. And this crosses party lines. It's one reason why I'm actually drawing thousands of disaffected Trump voters and Republicans and independents and libertarians, because I'm talking business, I'm talking numbers, and I'm saying, look, those 70 CEOs who raised their hands and said, yeah, I'm getting rid of my call center workers and replacing them with AI and software, they need to do that, because if they don't, they'll be fired the next quarter when someone realizes, wait a minute, you could have gotten rid of those costs and you didn't. And that's just the system we've built. A friend of mine said, we never knew that capitalism was going to get eaten by its son, technology. and that's where we are now. So we need to wake up and actually rewrite the rules of this economy to work for us, for human beings. And this is something that Republicans can get behind, the Democrats can get behind. There was one poll that showed I'm actually one of only 2 candidates in the field that 10% or more of Trump voters say they would support in the general, which means I am the strongest crossover candidate to beat Trump in the general in 2020.
And that's a great question, if you don't mind, Karen. There's a number of candidates out there. I've heard a lot more plans than I have vision so far. A lot of tails wagging dogs here. And plans are great, right? And you need to have a platform on which you're going to run. But how do you take on someone like Donald Trump? What do you? I know you've got to beat this primary field first. Certainly understand that. But how do you project forward? I think there's an optimism that comes through. Look, you've been at this a long time. I'm watching you. You're smiling. Not a lot of candidates smile as much as you do.
Well, thanks for noticing,
right?
Reed.
But no, I mean, how do you project that forward into a general election?
I think I'm an excellent foil for Donald Trump, in part because he hasn't touched me on the internet, in part because he knows that I'm actually very good at the internet. It's not like not a lot of the other politicians. And voters can sense that I'm actually trying to solve the problems that got Donald Trump elected in the first place. And a lot of Donald Trump's most effective attacks work better on politicians. He'll talk about, it's like, this person, they're just like part of the system, bought and paid for, like never going to actually do anything. And then you have Andrew Yang, and it's like, wait a minute, that guy's new on the scene and understands the pain, but has real solutions instead of these solutions that will just turn the clock back or try and bring the company backwards in a way that's not possible.
866-801-8255. Let me not be greedy and get some callers in. We got Chris in New York. You're on with Andrew Yang. Welcome.
Hi, Andrew. Hi, Karen.
Hey.
Hey, I'm one of those disaffected Republicans who's actually looking for a Democrat to vote for this year that you were talking about. And I love your economic plan, but I have one concern. The $1,000, won't that be eaten up by inflation? If everyone gets that same amount, won't that then people will raise the rent prices, the grocery prices, all other bills will go up, so it'll be like a net zero. How do you deal with that? I know it's sort of getting you to the morass of your plans, but that concerns me.
No, not at all, Chris. Thank you for the question. It's a very common question because it's very reasonable. So a little bit of history. We printed $4 trillion for the Wall Street banks and the bailout, and there was not meaningful inflation. So that's just one data point that most people don't realize. Now, if you look at your own prices, Chris, right now, there are three things that are breaking Americans' backs: housing, education, and healthcare. The inflation rates for those three things are sky high. But a lot of the other things in your life, clothing, electronics, most food, cars, media, all that stuff's either getting cheaper, staying the same price, or getting better. So we have a few dysfunctional markets that we have to try and address why the prices are going up. But if we put buying power into your hands, it actually makes it harder for a landlord to push around and exploit you because you have passive income that can go anywhere. You don't need to live in just one place. And if they really stick it to you, and other landlords try and stick it to you, then three of you get together and say, you know what, let's buy some fixer-upper in outer Queens, and the income goes with us wherever we go. Now, I have separate plans to try and bring down the inflation rates in healthcare, education, and housing because those three are core parts of our lives. But the reason why those costs are going up is not because we have money. It's actually the opposite. Where education, the costs are rising and families feel like they have no choice but to pay. Healthcare, their business model is just to keep ratcheting up prices and we don't feel like we have choice but to pay. And then housing's the trickiest one. It's local. There are certain metropolitan areas where the prices are going up because people feel like they have to live there to have access to certain jobs. Mm-hmm. And there are also, unfortunately, a lot of NIMBYism zoning regs where, like, if you try and build affordable housing, then people will say, not in my backyard.
Speaking of healthcare, Google is engaged with one of the United States' largest healthcare systems on a project called Project Nightingale. Are you familiar with this?
I saw that. I saw the summary. They're sucking up all of our data, right?
Yeah, and I'm nervous about that. Right, as we talk about AI, Google having access to our health data, and
everything in your email, everything that you're watching in terms of viewing media, everything that you're searching for on the internet, in addition to all of your healthcare information, in addition to if you've got the app in your phone, it moves everywhere with you, knows exactly where you are at all times, what your literal movement habits are at all times. That's a lot of information for one organization.
It's not just info either. Your data can be worth thousands of dollars a year just for that one person, depending upon if you have certain healthcare conditions, if you travel a lot, and what your consumption patterns are. And we're seeing not a dime of it. Our data is getting sold and resold and packaged and repackaged.
And it's becoming more and more valuable and more expensive to organizations.
What do you do
every year
as president?
So what I've come forward with is a plan that says our data is ours. Data is property. It is our property. If we loan it to you, Facebook or Google, that doesn't mean you own it. Like, we still own it. And so I have a bill of rights for all American consumers. Number one, our data is ours no matter what you're doing with it. Number two, if you get paid, you got to share it with us. Number three, anytime you sell, resell, repackage, you got to have an audit and tells us exactly what you're doing. And number four, we have to be able to turn this off or change preferences anytime we want. And there are techies who back me on this because they know that this path we're on is dangerous. Yeah. And this is actually a fundamental human question because we all think we're making decisions, we're getting information. Like, the fact is, at the extreme end, we can be led towards certain decisions or points of view by breadcrumbs of information that you don't even realize is happening to you. But in some cases, these tech companies can know you better than your family members.
Yes, it's good to hear you again, Karen. I enjoy listening to your station every evening on my way coming home from school.
All right.
And I was listening to your statistics that Mr. Yang was sharing about how we have such a low group of people that even though they get degrees, they can't find jobs. So I want to find out, have you thought about increasing more money in the Small Business Administration? And what is your view on that, allowing more people to become entrepreneurs and being able to develop more businesses? Because there are some students that do come up with some great plans, but they just don't have the wherewithal to know how to get a business going.
Why you all smiling?
Oh, I'm all about this. I spent 7 years running a nonprofit that helped create thousands of jobs in entrepreneurship and small businesses. I love this question so much. This is exactly where we should be driving our young people and our resources. Right now, instead of loading our kids up with $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in student loan debt, we should be giving them $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 small business loans to start a business. And then if they had $1,000 a month coming in, then they would know even if the business fails, they'll be all right.
Yeah,
they'll eat. Like right now, this is the darkest side of the punitive economy we've built, is that people feel like they're always on the edge. And as someone who started organizations and businesses, you know what is not the norm? That someone's on their last couple bucks trying to figure out how to make ends meet, and then they look up and say, I'm going to start a business. Like that's not the normal situation. Yeah. It's much more a situation where someone has like a bit of security, like and like a couple people that are looking at them being like, yeah, I'd like to help you with that. And then you start, and then you like put a couple bucks together and start a business. That's exactly where we need to go.
Why do you think people have such a resistance to that? It's almost as if we give somebody something, it's going to take something from me. Like if I give you $1,000 a month, somehow I'm going to suffer or something's going to be taken from me. And it's a weird psychology that we have in this country where we don't want people I made it from nothing and I came in with $1 in my pocket. These narratives are crazy.
No, you just put,
and half of it is mythology.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Totally.
You just hit the nail on the head again, Karen. And what this is a mindset of scarcity. Is that if you get it, I don't get it, or if you get it, somehow like it's gonna hurt me. And the opposite of that is a mindset of abundance, where it's like you get it, I get it. Things grow, all is good.
Because you want everyone to get it.
Yeah.
So everyone gets the $1,000, right?
Yeah.
Everybody.
Not
just poor people, not
just black people.
Not just
you
black
can say
people.
It.
And it's unfortunate.
That scares people.
As soon as you say black people do run.
Like,
they
wait,
run.
black people are gonna get some money? Oh,
No.
hell no!
Yeah.
I'll give up my $1,000 just to keep them from having it.
Yeah. It's true. You're laughing, but
that's true.
It's true. Facts.
No. I mean, right now, like things have changed enough where people look up and say, like, we need to do this for everybody.
Yeah.
Okay.
Listen, your thing about small business is interesting too, because small businesses employ. I mean, we have this myth that we think that large companies are who's employing people in this country, and really, it's not. It's small businesses. Small businesses employ 58.9 million people in America. Mm-hmm. Almost 50% of Americans are employed by small businesses, not big corporations.
And one of the reasons I'm running for president is I spent 7 years running a nonprofit to help entrepreneurs and small businesses. And it's bad, where the rates of business formation are down multi-decade lows in 80% of the country. Rates of business formation for young people, multi-generational lows. Like, it's not happening natively right now. And the internet, instead of being this force for entrepreneurship, is a force for mega consolidation.
Yeah.
A couple of generations ago, you might have opened a flower shop or a hardware store. Now, none of those businesses make sense. Right. Because Amazon will just undercut you. They don't even need to take money. They don't need to make profit.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
They did that first to publishing, because I was in publishing, and I said, wow, so you're going to actually charge less than what the publishers are charging for a book and take a loss. Wow.
Yeah, and then they look around and be like, hey, I'm not price gouging, so what are you going to do about it? And the government's like, thumbs up. They're valued at $1 trillion, and they don't even need to show a profit in any given quarter. So how the heck can a small business person compete against that?
They can't. Talk international, because one last thing. How do you deal with Russia, China, and all over the globe, people who are not our friends? And then we've created these dictatorships under this administration in places like Chile and Brazil and even Syria and other places where we are conspiring almost with people, Philippines, who are not doing humanitarian things or human rights things. How are you going to deal with that as president?
Unfortunately, the environment's going to get more and more rough and favorable for populists because of climate change and migrant crises, among other things. Mm-hmm. To me, our strength abroad reflects how we're doing at home. We fell apart at home. We elected Donald Trump, and now we have an erratic and unpredictable, unreliable leader, and so other countries are just throwing their hands up, being like, "Oh, I guess the U.S. is out of it for a while." And as president, I would turn that around. I would say, first, we got to become stronger and more whole at home, but then we can project a more reliable and sustained foreign policy abroad, invest in our relationships and partnerships and alliances, and try and reestablish some kind of international norms, because right now those norms are falling apart, and it makes it very, very hard to make any kind of progress on something like climate change or AI or protecting our journalists or human rights abuses in places like China.
Have you changed your mind about something that you came into this absolutely knowing and now you've rethought it?
Well, one of the biggest changes I made was that I talked to this high school student who said that his classmates had fentanyl patches on their shoulders and they're addicted to opiates, and what are we going to do about it? And I was like, oh my gosh, what do you do about that? And then I dug into what other countries have done, and other countries have decriminalized opiates for personal use and said, if we catch you with them, we're going to take the drugs, but we're going to refer you to counseling or treatment. And so I shifted my thinking on that, because that high school student just put it to me straight and was like, look, my friends are not going anywhere near counseling or treatment because they're afraid they're going to go to jail. Like that they're using an illegal substance and they're 18.
Wow. And you got to go. Don't be a stranger. Come back anytime. You're right down the street in New York, so
Thank
you're
you
here.
so much, Karen. Thank
Andrew
you.
Yang.
As well.
Go to Yang 2020. Check him out.